Literacy. We know it as reading and writing, but it has become so much more. It's enabling people, especially our Keiki, to understand concepts and ideas and express opinions. It's teaching them skills and knowledge to meet demands presented by today's evolving technology. Are we preparing children to not only participate in a wider society, but to lead and solve problems? Literacy in Hawaiʻi. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaiʻi start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaiʻi. I'm Laura Yamada. Well, numerous historical accounts say that by the early 1830s, the literacy rate in the Hawaiian Kingdom was above 90%. Back then, it was Native Hawaiians reading and writing their own language. Fast forward to today, experts put Hawaii's literacy rate at 84%. That means thousands of Hawaiʻi adults cannot read or write at a basic level. Tonight, we have 4 guests involved in improving Hawaii's literacy rate, not just for children, but for adults as well. So we look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaiʻi Facebook page. All right, now to our guests. Lynn Wahe'e is the president of Read to Me International. She is a former First Lady of Hawaii, during which time she served as the honorary chair of the Governor's Council for Literacy. Stacy Kaneshige is the branch director of the Hawaii State Library System. And Suzanne Schold is the executive director of Hawaii Literacy Incorporated, a local nonprofit that works with adults and children to build reading, writing, and life skills. And Stephen Schatz is the executive director of Hawaii P20 Partnerships for Education, a statewide partnership led by the Executive Office on Early Learning, the Hawaii Department of Education, and the University of Hawaii. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here. We just have a table full of people who've been very dedicated to literacy and education for a long time. So thank you so much for all of your efforts. So let's Suzanne, I'm going to start with you. Let's just kind of set this up a little bit and talk about some of the statistics that we're talking about here. I threw out the 84% literacy. What else can you share about where we're at right now?
Sure. So if you take the 84%, like you said, it's about 1 in 6 adults in Hawaii who struggle with reading and writing. If you translate that to our adult population, it's about 150,000 people across our islands. And that may not mean that they cannot read a single word. That's not what we're talking about, but this is functional literacy, being able to fill out a job application, help your children, and use words and writing in the ways that we do that many people take for granted. For about 150,000 people in our state, that's not possible. So that's what we're really talking about in terms of the scope of the problem and how hidden that problem is, because I think when we say that, people are often somewhat surprised.
And that's something we'll get into too, about the stigma and how that kind of leads to a lot of that. How are we talking about comparing nationally? I mean, is that, where are we compared to nationally, and has it changed?
We are, I guess, unfortunately, only slightly below the national average. So the national average is about 2 points better than us. So not a dramatic difference across the entire country. The rates are somewhat similar. They're a little higher in some of the states that we typically think of as more affluent, New York, places like that, and a little lower in the Deep South. But basically across the country, there is about a 14 to 17% illiteracy rate across adults.
Big conversation for the country. So I'll get to all the panel in just a minute, but talking about for someone who is functionally illiterate, what that means in terms of jobs, future income. We have a few graphics, though, that I think we want to get to first. Just a couple of other statistics to show you. First one here, 70% of people with the lowest literacy skills have no full or part-time job. And the next one, adults who have, quote unquote, below basic skills, earning an average of $15,000. $15,480. I mean, imagine that here in Hawaii. But that's the average, how difficult that would be. I think we've got one more here. Adults who have proficient or better skills earn an average of then $35,000. Still tough here in Hawaii. But when you think about those numbers, and I'm sure all of you see this rippling through the work that you're doing, the impact that it has in these areas on different levels. Who wants to?
I think one of the things we need to remember is that literacy is not a subject in school. Mm-hmm. Literacy is the way in which our community can engage and even to be part of our democracy. There's a great quote by former President Obama, where he said literacy is the most basic currency of the knowledge economy. And I think about our students, our kids, when they grow older, they're going to be in this world that's so complicated, and it's filled with words, and they're going to have to navigate that in a way that's really sophisticated, probably more sophisticated than what we've had to deal with. And the only way we're going to ensure that they have those skills is by really creating an educational pipeline that puts literacy at the front of the equation.
So you're looking a lot at the literacy rates in public schools. Fairly low, is that fair to say?
It is fair to say.
Your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say a couple things. I think it's absolutely
Where are we
fair
at right now? Sorry to
I think it's fair to say we're not where we need to be. I also do want to say that we've made some pretty dramatic improvements over the last 10 years in literacy within our public school system. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is the only nationwide test that's given, Hawaii's been one of the biggest gainers of all the states.
Really?
We have fewer students who require remediation in English when they enter the University of Hawaii system. We have a higher graduation rate and higher college going rate. So all that to say, there's improvement happening, but we're nowhere near where we need to be.
So what's made it so tough? What do you think have been some of the big factors?
I mean, this work is hard. And I think part of what we need to do is embrace this challenge as a community. It's great to have folks on the panel who are all committed to making an impact. I think we need to realize that increasing literacy is not simply one teacher's responsibility. It's not the English language arts teacher. It's not the English professor at University of Hawaii. It's all of us together really focusing on this effort.
And talking about focusing on this, I mean, that's such a big part of the engagement, and whatever different levels it may be, and all of you have been involved in programs that create that kind of engagement and interest. So let's talk to you, Stacey, about what you've seen in recent years at the library and through the library system. What's changed? What are you noticing?
You know, as you mentioned, life is hard in Hawaii. You know, there's cost of living, and people are working more jobs just to kind of make ends meet. And so what we're trying at the library is to make sure that they remember that the public libraries are created spaces that are shared for everybody. And even if your reading skills are not the greatest, that's the place you need to go to improve them. It's a place where you can read and try and gain those skills as an individual, but it's also a community. So it's kind of learning in solitary, but in a communal space. And so we want to make sure that we engage kids early, and that if there are parents that don't have the reading skills that they would like, that we have programs that kind of work them in as well. So we have digital tools like Mango Languages that have over 21 different languages that provide English as a second language. And we try and engage parents as much as possible in things like Every Child Ready to Read, so that the parents and the caregivers are given tools on how to engage their kids, so that it becomes a space where they feel comfortable in to engage in, and if they can improve themselves as well, we're always open. The library is space for everybody, and we provide materials and spaces, and so we really would like to continue to reach out and partner with the other agencies and the Department of Education to make sure that those spaces are available for everybody.
I want to do a quick follow-up question. So who are you seeing now as the primary clientele at the library? Who are you actually seeing there?
It's actually everybody, you know, because libraries have high-speed internet, so we are seeing everybody.
You know, accelerator. Wi-Fi? Okay, great. I'll be there.
So there's power, there's Wi-Fi, there's clean bathrooms, AC, you know, water fountains. So we see the kids coming in after school who are, you know, hopefully finding something great to read, but also getting a drink of water and cooling off and then heading out. We're seeing grandparents bringing in their grandkids. We're seeing caregivers. We're seeing people who are looking for co-worker spaces that are asking us about shared spaces. And so you'll see in our bigger libraries, our newer libraries, there's always meeting rooms and spaces to lend out, because that is one of the highest demand things of our communities, and we see in the new libraries is that they want community spaces. And so we're seeing pretty much how we always have seen people, and that's the whole range of
Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think there's such a demand for that right now? Why has that grown to be one of the top demands?
You know, I think when you're trying to figure out how you're going to make ends meet or how to improve yourself or start and launch that new company or business, using as many free resources as possible is always a great way to start. And so if you can use the high-speed internet, you know, you can use the library spaces, you know, to try and build that business plan by using resources in the library. It gives you a safe place to kind of try ideas without making that initial investment, because we're providing the resources. Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point as far as the reality of the way that people are living today, and the environment they're in, the environment they can afford, the type of lifestyle they have, and making these types of just spaces available. So she was talking about Stacey was talking about creating a safe space, tools, resources that involve the entire family. And that's something that, through your program, has always been a focus.
Yeah. Can I get back to the libraries?
Of course. Please do.
I mean, the library should be the heart of the community. You know, it just should be, and I think it really is working toward that goal. I mean, don't you folks have courts?
Yeah, so we did host a
I think that's wonderful.
We hosted the courts to have a session in the library.
Really?
Yeah.
Because that's where the community is, and instead of having to drive all the way into town or to Kapolei or wherever, you know, they can do it right in the community. And
wait, I need to learn a little bit more about this. What do you mean? Set this up for me.
So we've had the judiciary approach us to say that, you know, there are places that courts, we know people need to go to court, but they can't come all the way into town or things. Okay. And so they've approached us and asking us if they can partner with us and use our spaces. And we are, as we always say, a community space. And so we work with them. Yeah. And we also, when we had citizenship, we worked with naturalization, and so we had them come in, and they became citizens in the Kapolei Library.
You know, and I think too, as far as just creating an environment where people feel comfortable and safe, whether it be the environment itself or the support system around it. And I know that's always been weaved into the way that your program operates.
And I want to say something about literacy.
Yeah.
It begins in the home. I mean, literacy really begins in the home from the time you bring your child home from the hospital. So for us, we promote reading aloud to children because we know through research that is the single most important activity for building the knowledge required for eventual success in reading. So why don't we start earlier, you know? So we begin that by talking with our children, by singing with our children, by reading aloud to our children. Even when the child is still in the womb, that child will recognize your voice or whoever is reading to the child while the child is still developing. So because literacy begins in the home, if we can give them a really good head start, I think by the time they enter kindergarten, they'll be ready for school.
So I want to expand on that as far as the learning, the way that we learn, and why reading aloud enhances the learning experience. Explain to people a little bit more about what it does when somebody's reading aloud to you.
Well, if you think about how you acquire language, it's because people are talking to you all the time. Well, that's how we acquire language. But the beauty about reading books aloud to children is that an author, you know, as he or she writes the book, is looking for specific words to include in the story, something that is exact, or a word that captures exactly what that author is trying to convey. And this is why when children are read aloud to, their vocabulary just grows exponentially. And anybody who takes the time always to read to their children, and actually we have a program on the Waianae Coast where it's just a 5-week class and a 6th one for celebration, where we teach the parents how to read aloud to their children.
Wow.
So by the end of the course, they're also excited about it. Just in our recent graduate class that we had a father that was part of the program, and he said he was really upset with his wife when they started But now, after he's learned all these tips and these techniques, he said he can't wait. The children are just so excited as soon as he steps through the door. They want to be read to, and he is enjoying reading aloud to his children.
I have to ask you, why was he upset?
Well, because he didn't really want to do it, but his wife just signed him up.
Yeah, but this is something that I think we talked about a little earlier in the break room was sometimes the reason why people can get to the point of being an adult where you have to get a job, you have to function, but you still have these issues with illiteracy, and why that is, and why it's so difficult at that point for people to talk about it and deal with it.
I think absolutely, as an adult, we assume that adults can read. I mean, that's just our sort of base how we move through the community. So we assume that people learn how to read in school, and many do, and then some don't. And the sense of that individual coming out of school or dropping out of school early is that they have somehow failed. It's not that the system has failed them or something has happened to them or that somebody didn't teach them in the right way. Is that they somehow as an individual has failed. And so there's a lot of shame. Many of the adults, we have an adult literacy program. We provide one-to-one tutoring for any adult who wants to improve their reading and writing. And there are so many adults who, in that first phone call, are either in tears or have pretended to have a friend. And the amount of bravery it takes for them to even pick up that phone and call us and say, I need help with reading and writing is really astounding, really humbling in many senses when you talk to somebody who's so dedicated to making a better life for their family that they're overcoming this shame. And so there's a lot of reasons why people delay in making that call. One of my favorite parts of my job is 3 or 4 weeks later when they've met with their tutor and they start to put some of those pieces together. They're like, oh, I don't care, I'm telling everybody. And so there's a sense of, for many of the adults we work with, they have thought that they couldn't learn to read and write, and it's simply not true. They weren't taught in the right way. They weren't given the individual time. They maybe didn't have a parent at home who could read or write to them, and they don't want to perpetuate that cycle on their children, and so they're reaching out for help. And that's really one of the beauties is when you see somebody start to put those pieces together, the things that they missed out in school can come together for somebody at any age.
And I think Hawaii Literacy does such a good job, with having their tutors working with the parents. I mean, they try to find a good match for the people who need the help. And, heartwarming stories about people who have finally learned how to read well enough that they feel a lot more confident. So.
Lynn and I have worked together in a project where we were talking about with adults and parents who maybe aren't at that place where they can pick up the book of the benefits for their children of just telling stories and singing songs and using your verbal vocabulary to help your child build. So even for adults who maybe can't just pick up that book and read to their child, there's so many other things they can do.
Engaging more of the senses.
Absolutely.
Yeah, makes absolute sense.
Yeah. Something I'd like to add to that is I think we have a real big achievement gap between boys and girls, and some of that is due to the fact that we may not be appealing to interests as much as we should be with our boys, and so we actually have to be a little bit more conscious about getting interesting materials, and that goes both ways. But the stories that Susan tells about adults, those can be prevented if we're really systematic about the way in which we teach reading at an early age. I think vocabulary is huge. So talking to your kids at home, telling them stories, whether you're reading or not, makes a real big impact on whether they're going to be able to comprehend what's presented to them later. But interest level is really important too.
Now, I want to talk about that a little bit more, and then also some other stories that I know all of you have. But before we do that, I want to roll a little video clip here. We at PBS Hawaii, we've been doing a series of spots on literacy and reading. So let's go ahead and show one of those.
Aloha, this is Aranganat, the head men's basketball coach here at the University of Hawaii. I have the honor today to read The Stonecutter's Credo by Jacob Riis. When nothing seems to help, I go look at a stonecutter hammering away at his rock, perhaps 100 times without as much as a crack showing in it. Yet at the 101st blow, it will split in two. And I know it was not that blow that did it, but all that had gone before.
Those are fun. There's a whole series of those. But the point being is just to show so many people in the community the joy they can get out of reading. And the stories. I want to ask you, Lynn, are there particular books or stories that are just, ooh, they're just hot right now?
I don't know about hot right now.
They're popular or
and I have a
fun.
few real classic books that I really enjoy, children's stories. And there's one now that's, well, I think it's been out a couple of years, but I only noticed it now. It's called The Invisible Boy.
Invisible Boy.
Well, because, you know, he's always the last to be chosen, and nobody really pays attention to him until he meets a new person who comes to school. But I think it's really important for us to also develop children who are social, who have good social, emotional maturity. And it seems that maybe these days we're so busy doing all kinds of other things that we're kind of neglecting that. We're having children grow up who maybe don't know manners, who don't know how to share, and you know, just be sharing and
It leads
caring
to that
people.
learning process.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
and
this
books can so often bring that out in a child.
And Steve, this is something that you've talked about as well, is that all of you really, the different ways that it's not just about the reading of the book, but the different factors that play into the ability to learn and the ability to engage and the ability to feel that connection to it in different ways. And sometimes maybe doesn't really have any direct relation to reading itself.
Yeah, I think it's, when I think about historically where literacy and education have been used as a tool of empowerment for individuals or groups, or a tool of oppression. And when you think about the slavery era in America, and slaves were prohibited from acquiring an education, or in Afghanistan today where girls are still struggling to go to school. And so, you know, looking a little bit bigger picture, literacy and education are the way in which we help our the folks in our community to engage. And on the flip side, it can actually be marginalizing if they're not literate.
Yeah.
And so the great work that the folks around this table are doing is about trying to help make those connections.
You were talking too about how citizenship, people feeling like they were part of society in that way, or just involvement in community projects, just whatever that made them feel better, helps to lubricate the willingness to learn reading. Fair to say?
Absolutely. I think it's the way, literacy is really how you get information. It's also how you can provide information. If you want your voice to be heard and you're not able to write a letter or send a text, you are really limited in how much you can influence things that affect your everyday life. And so I think Steve is absolutely right. Not having the ability to read and write really can be marginalized, and you are left out of conversations that you have something important to share with.
I think if you break it down, you know, if you can't read your medical instructions, if you can't feel confident in bringing a case to court, you know, there's so many things that are blocked if you don't have those literacy skills or an idea of how to get that information, which is a real challenge. And I really do believe, like everyone on the panel says, that we really need to build these readers from a very young age. And we have to encourage readers, you know, when they're starting. And so one of the fun things the library is doing is we have kids reading to dogs, because they're non-judgmental, and you know, so like at Hilo, you can read to Pierre. He's a little Chihuahua therapy dog, and
that is brilliant.
At Lahaina, you can read to Sammy, and so you know, so the kids are so eager to come into the library because they want
I'm
that
guessing they
slot.
would work with adults too.
Yeah.
Work with everybody. I'd have fun with that.
So we do things like that, and we go out into the community. So there's a Ko Lauloa Battle of the Books that they're doing, and so what the library's done is partnered with 5 area schools, and they've made it a competition. So they have all the kids read 13 books, and the librarians create questions, and we do like a quiz bowl, and it's in rounds, and they do it at the Turtle Bay And so for some of these kids, it's the first time they've been in a resort hotel. So all of a sudden it's a big deal. And so they get very competitive along with their parents and families.
I was going to tap into the competitive nature.
But what we've heard from them is that they've made it an entire family thing where mom, dad, the siblings, they're all after they eat dinner, they're reading the books. They're creating boards of storylines and trying to, give tips on what happened next. And so things like that really engage the whole family is really what we're trying to get at, because it makes reading a fun thing for everyone, Mm-hmm.
That's so true when you think about whether it be kids or adults. If you're feeling shame, if you're feeling insecure, if you're not feeling supported, how difficult it is to move forward in that way. But once you do have that, people want to read.
Mm-hmm.
They want to understand this because they know the ramifications. So let me get some of these questions here. This is from Esther in Waipio. She said, what are you doing to ensure that kids are reading by the 3rd grade? I guess that's a benchmark in Esther's mind.
So actually, Suzanne and I have been working a little bit on this. Let me say that 3rd grade matters a lot, not because it's an end in and of itself, but because it's really a predictor of future success in the educational pipeline and even in the
So that's a pretty well-known metric.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I would say a couple things. One is, I think the expansion of preschool is a good thing. The more high-quality preschool experiences we can have for our students, the more that they'll be prepared. I think one of the things that we need to do an even better job of is using the research about how students learn to read in the early grades. The science is pretty settled on it, that phonics works.
Well, you went right into some questions from Petra here. She's got 2, and so I'm just gonna float this into your answer. She says, learning to read. It's like you read Petra's mind. Hi, Petra. Learning to read isn't a natural process. There is evidence that students must be taught systematic, explicit phonics. And she also adds, there's a national conversation happening about why teachers don't know the science of reading and the impact that has on students. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we just need to make sure that we're being research-based about our instruction, and I think there's evidence that that's starting to happen. As I said, the reading results in 4th grade are looking better than they have in the past, but we need to be diligent about it, and I would say specifically for maybe our low-income communities where they might not have the safety nets of if the kid is struggling in school, taking them to another tutoring program. We need to be really diligent about providing systematic instruction at an early age.
Can I ask a question? So, do you feel that our universities are preparing our teachers as far as what we know research says about the phonics and the vocabulary and the comprehension and fluency and all of that? Are they learning these things so that when they go into the classroom, they're ready?
I think they are. I think that the universities are aware of what the research says, and I think we just as a community have to continue to be focused on it, and especially for those early education teachers.
Boy, you are in sync with our viewers because you are just leading to all their questions. One caller saying, noticing no representatives from UH or the DOE on the panel tonight. What steps or structures are put in place to partner with our schools from these groups? Your P20 partner is with UHN.
Yes.
So we could say technically they're here.
Yeah.
But we'll slide that in
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I think we all sort of work together on these efforts, and certainly the University of Hawaii and the DOE are the sort of the main players, I think, when we
What's
think
the name
about
of the
this.
entity within your group? It's the alignment of these organizations.
So we have a P20 council, which is a larger group, and then there's actually there's a body called the Teacher Education Coordinating Committee that's chaired by the Dean of the College of Ed at UH Manoa, as well as the Superintendent of Schools. And they talk about issues related to teacher preparation in general, but at times the conversation is about literacy as well.
So I'd imagine all of you are oftentimes pulled into these committees and conversations about this alignment throughout the different educational systems to make sure they're talking.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all try to get on the same page. We're actually bringing together various stakeholders to try and develop a literacy plan for the state. So we're in the beginnings of those conversations, but really the idea is that we all coalesce around a common vision.
And I think I agree with Steve. I also think there's more that all of us can do in that area. There has been, as in all bureaucracies, a lot of silos. And so there is sort of this idea of like the nonprofit sector will go and do our programs and go reach out to parents, and the libraries will do their thing, and DOE will work with UH, but maybe that's separate from what people do out of school. And so I think there is a lot more opportunity in that area for us to reach parents at multiple points within the DOE, within the community college system, in the hospitals and programs like Lynn's. For us to coordinate on our programs serve about 3,000 to 4,000 kids each year. Almost all of them are in the group that Steve's talking about, the low-income schools, struggling readers, often with families with not a lot of resources. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to continue to grow those partnerships. We've been talking about putting some of our services right into the libraries, creating teams where we can understand what the challenges that the teachers are facing when they have these students who are really struggling, and what else can we all do as a community. So finding ways to put more tutoring into low-income schools or have parent programs available. I think there's a lot more we can do in that area, and that's one of the things that really excites me about conversations like this, is to hear what people are already doing and helping amplify that and be able to take what we're all strong at and build so that we can really make sure that all the kids in our community are learning to read and write.
So let's, so I want to go to a couple other graphics here, kind of the reflecting on the result of what can happen, or the outcomes that can happen sometimes when there isn't the emphasis on learning and reading and literacy. Some stats for you. More than 60% of men and women in prison in America not functionally literate. Again, more than 60% of men and women that are in prison, and they can barely read or write at the most basic level. We've got one more graphic here to show you. Adults who are or have been in prison and complete a new literacy or basic education program, 43% less likely to be reincarcerated. And I won't impose on you to throw stats at me about prison rates and whatnot, but I'm sure you're quite familiar with how much of a direct impact this is on our prison population, the potential for people to go down this path.
We have a prison project at the Women's Correctional Facility.
Really?
Where we work with the inmates to write and illustrate their own stories, and we publish them.
Wow.
And then, of course, because we're about reading aloud, they also record it onto CDs, and we send both the books and the CD home to the children. When you talk about recidivism, and I think it's a pretty high rate of inmates going right back once they're out, but they go right back in. What they found is that if they have a really strong family unit, the chances of them going back are reduced. So through this program, I think the moms feel regret that they're not out there for their children. Right. So they will often write a story almost saying that I'm sorry, I messed up, or something along that line. You know, they might write a story along that line. And I think for them and for their child receiving something, it really means a lot to the child to have a book that the mom has recorded and written for them. So I think, you know, it's possible to help some of those people who are in there and prevent them from going back in again. And maybe another thing that we need to consider is that maybe those rates, as far as people who can't read very well, it might not be as high as we're saying, because more and more there are a lot of people who are going in there because of drugs, and they're not necessarily just the poor people who are
So
going
what do
in
you think
there.
it is about that particular output in that way, them being able to put it down in writing it, creating something? What do you think it is about that type of output that
Well, I
really
think
helps?
I think for the inmate, it's empowering, and they are so proud of their books once they are published. And for some of them, we had one inmate who hadn't seen her daughter in 7 years, and then she was released. But through that book, she was be connected with her daughter.
Wow. Yeah. That's powerful. All right. Just got a whole bunch of other questions. But before we get to that, I'm having fun showing some of these spots we have because they're really neat. And PBS got a lot of people involved. So we want to go ahead and show you another one of those.
Aha!
Hello, my name is Jim Leahy, and I am reading right now a book called Ulysses S. Grant, the story of Grant and the Civil War by Ron Chernow. This paragraph is how Grant felt after the surrender of Robert E. Lee. I felt like anything rather than rejoicing at the downfall of a foe who had fought so long and valiantly and had suffered so much for a cause, though that cause was, I believe, one of the worst for which a people ever fought, and one for which there was the least excuse. Thank you. Mahalo.
Get caught reading. Read, listen, and enjoy at pbshawaii.org.
I gotta say, you know what I loved about that one? You have this grand figure, historical figure, part of this big old thick book, and it's ever so intimidating looking. And then you get to hear these wonderful stories about what happened to them as human beings. And it just becomes this neat connection, I think, being able to be exposed through books to these different human beings that have existed in our society.
You know, there's a lot to be said about literary fiction and even autobiographies because it engages the reader to gain empathy because you have to, for that time that you're immersed in that story, you're experiencing what they're describing. And so it really does open you to different things. And I think we all kind of realize that when you can get people reading and deep reading, not just surface reading like how you do with emails and things, when you're actually engaging with a book and you're really putting yourself in that plot and you're reading it sequentially, there's so much going on with your brain, you know, and it's just improving empathy and all of those basic skills that we all want in our kids as well as our community members. And I think having greater empathy and being able to think sequentially is really something that people don't think about when they're reading, but it just happens, and that's one of the great things about books.
I think it goes back into some of the different ways that all of you have been talking about to explore, to help people learn to read, because people are different. And they learn in different ways. They have different environments. So taking the time to, whether it's young boys, young girls, women, men, different social situations. A couple of quick bits here. This is from Dale. What % of students, maybe this is to you, Stephen, what % of students in our public schools can be characterized as struggling readers? Or maybe one of you. Is this percentage better or worse than it was, say, 10, 20 years ago? What's your gauge on that? Any of you, actually?
Yeah, I think it depends on the definition, but I think it's too many, I'll tell you that. I think that in the last 10 years, that percentage has declined dramatically. We have about, I think, 40% of our students reading at the proficient level on the NAEP assessment in 4th grade, so that's nowhere near where we need to be. But again, I want to say that's a pretty good improvement over the past 10 years, and that trajectory continues to be in the right direction.
Okay, here's one from Barbara in Waialua. Is there any research tying decline in literacy to increase in technology? You guys heard any of that research floating out there?
No.
As far as we know, there isn't. There's a lot of anecdotal, people will say, oh, now kids these days. But there really isn't evidence of that. There is some evidence around both adults and children having less focus. Some of the points that Stacey just meant about reading is actually good for you. It builds your brain, it builds critical thinking. There's even some evidence now that suggests that it lowers your blood pressure and creates some other good health benefits for you. So certainly reading is beneficial, but I don't necessarily think that technology has any relation to decreasing literacy, but maybe some of the things that make us read more might be decreasing because of technology.
I can't help but wonder the mechanism for where you're getting those words. Maybe just getting older, but when I admit my eyes are a little more stressed if I'm reading it off a computer. And I think it's the light, they say, and then also it makes it a little tougher to read. Okay, here's a couple more questions. Are you considering bringing back bookmobiles? This is from Mary and Quiet. Are there still some bookmobiles out there?
We have 2 bookmobiles, so we
I
run
thought
them.
so. Mary, there are some.
The library has them.
Mary wants one on Kauai.
We're all for bookmobiles around this table.
They're out there. And how many entities are there? Still quite a few that do have bookmobiles?
There's just a couple. We have 2. You guys have 3. One on Maui that's really swanky.
Yeah, so actually,
yes,
I must brag about our Maui bookmobile, and it's not even. So it was actually a partnership. So the Maui Friends of the Library,
okay,
they got the community support, and they bought Wailuku Public Library their new bookmobile. And
I need to see what defines swanky. I gotta see this thing.
It's swanky, yes. So it was actually designed to be a bookmobile. So what happens a lot of times is if you try and get a big truck and make it into a bookmobile, it'll break a lot because of the weight strain, and it's just constantly driving around. This one was designed so from the chassis up to be a bookmobile. So they designed the bookshelves on it. It has a monitor that swings out. It has a lift. So if you need
fancy
ADA things, but it also stops at the Maui Correctional Facility. It stops at preschools, it stops at senior centers. It really does expand the library out into the community.
Okay, here's another one. What do you think about graphic novels? Graphic novels.
I guess if they're going to read it.
Case by case situation there.
You know, I think it's one of those things. I agree that we shouldn't be judgmental about what folks are reading. If a kid wants to read a surfer magazine, let them read a surfer magazine. That'll get them excited. And if it's a graphic novel, it's a graphic novel.
That is
if it's appropriate for their grade level,
excellent
that's fine.
point in that understanding the different ways to engage people, what gets them excited, like you said, because it opens up that door.
We found that some of the struggling readers, that is actually the place where they start to feel confidence about reading, and that will lead them to things that are a little more challenging. And so I think the graphic novels, especially for some of our boys, I don't want to stereotype, that are really hesitant readers, that is a place where they come into the family libraries and they're really excited about getting those types of books, and then that opens the door for either help with homework, things they need to do with school, or maybe they're just going to read every single graphic novel we had, and that's more than they would have done anyway. So I have to say I'm for it.
Okay, let's see a couple here from Dolores and Keiki. Thanks, Stephen, for mentioning preschool. Should say more reading starts before kindergarten. Special education has a speech pathologist. So important since reading begins with talking. I think that's also what you're kind of, she's commenting, I think, more so, and then also to that hearing it and the talking aspect of it, connecting that to, fair to say?
Okay.
No, maybe not. Okay, what grade level is considered for functional English? Is it, what would you say? Is there that kind of a gauge? This is Elizabeth, also from Kauai. What is the grade level considered for functional English?
English proficiency isn't done by grade level.
Not by grade level.
Yeah, there's a 1 to 5 sort of basic to fluent scale that would be for any age group.
Okay, let me get to some other little twists here. Clayton from Eva. Why, well, I'm not sure if this is quite fair, but maybe you want to address this. Why don't public schools recognize students with dyslexia and provide programs to help them? I'm guessing there is, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about students with disabilities is oftentimes the intervention is not a different kind of instruction, but more time. So if a student's struggling in class, they might need an extra hour after school one-on-one. And so these interventions for whoever's struggling may not actually look different instructionally, but they might just need a little bit more attention to ensure they get to where they need to go.
How are we on the resources to be able to deal with, kids or adults or whomever have additional learning disadvantages in some shape or form?
I mean, I think the resources are always a challenge. I think it's great that there are community organizations that are supportive. I think Stacy was mentioning that the legislature has been real supportive of the libraries in the past few years, which is a really good sign as well.
Okay, here's another one. There seems to be a lot of focus on literacy for children, but are any of you working with seniors and the elderly? Could a partnership work to grow literate students while also supporting Alzheimer's patients? A couple of little different looking at that. But how about that population?
I can definitely speak to the first part of it. So we do an adult literacy tutoring program. So it starts with any child who's out of the DOE system. So our youngest student right now is 17 years old. Our oldest student is about, I don't want to call her out, but about 76-ish.
Okay.
But certainly many people come to us as seniors. Sometimes they've worked their whole lives to support their families, and this is the first chance they've had to come back and learn to read. And the structure really stays the same. Our adults learn when they want to learn. They have to be self-motivated, and the one-to-one attention is crucial. So having somebody who can help them achieve their goals, whatever that may be at 17 or 76, and to help them go quickly through the things they already know and stop in the places where they need that extra hour or 2 hours to focus on. And so I think that's wonderful that when seniors come to learn to read, often other things in their life have delayed that. And often they come as very motivated students because it's been something they've wanted to do for decades.
Let's talk a little bit more. You all touched on some of the different programs to reach different groups, some of the tools. And I think there was more to talk about there, about sort of what you are seeing that are reaching these different groups. What's attractive to them? What's working with the different age groups?
So actually, for the graphic novels, we will say that has classically been the way we get teens to read. And when they find a series they like, they are voracious. The kids that didn't want to read suddenly are taking out stacks of books. And we love that because a lot of times too, when they get interested in a topic or a genre, they'll start looking beyond what we can supply, and then they'll start looking for fiction books. And the language in graphic novels is quite complex. I think the thing for parents is to understand, and it's a cultural thing, that graphic novels are for all ages, and so you just want to make sure that you're giving your child the level of content that you would like them to read, because some of it is adult focused, and that's just from where it came from.
You talked about some other tools too that help some of the adults, or that are bringing the adults in. What are you referring to?
So we have a lot of things like part of the digital tools that we have are bringing people in. So Mango Languages is bringing people in.
What's Mango Languages for people who don't know?
Oh, okay. So Mango Languages is our language learning database.
Okay.
So if you are going to travel to a different country, you can learn through our database, and it takes it through interactive. The power of Mango Languages is they always use native speakers. And so when you're learning how to speak it, you're learning from a native speaker. And so we have over 70 languages there. And if you're English as a second language, we have 21 languages that it'll teach you English. So we have those Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi is always very popular to bring people in. And while they're waiting for a spot on our internet, high-speed internet computers, we have 3 million books or materials that you can check out. We also have movie nights where we have a movie licensing, so we get a new release movie DVD, and so before we put it in circulation, we'll have a movie night, and we'll show it to the whole community. You can watch it for
there's
free.
a lot going on at the library. Holy smoke. So what else? Talk about some other programs, some other methods that all of you, that maybe we haven't touched on yet, that you're seeing is working and engaging people in different ways. I think you had talked about some of the other programs and the way that you're reaching the family and the family unit.
Sure. Yeah, I think that each of you have actually said words that really resonate for me in terms of how to involve people. One is the interactive of getting something that is going to involve somebody in a way that they're comfortable. The one-to-one, I think, is just truly super important for struggling readers, whether it's tutoring for a young child, a parent who's sitting and reading to their child, or an adult who's working with another adult on their pace. That really feels like a place that we've spent a lot of our resources growing. So we've added peer tutoring programs. We're hoping to put trained high school students in the libraries to work with younger students, other trained volunteers who can work with adults in the libraries and any other location around the island. So my sense from seeing certainly adults learn to read, that one-to-one attention is the key. And so a lot of our program and resources goes to training volunteers, recruiting volunteers, making sure that our staff can be ready to answer questions on a whole range of those barriers that can stop somebody from learning, whether it's where to go or finding books that are of interest to them, how to help their children. It could be dozens of questions, and so I think that's really important for us.
And we were talking earlier too about how if you have friends or family that you suspect in some shape or form that maybe are having some difficulties, how to connect with that awareness and maybe what to do about it, how to kind of help that person. What have you seen is a path to think about for people who are kind of like, I know this person needs help, I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the thing first to recognize is that when we say about 1 in 6 adults on our islands are in this situation, almost all of us absolutely know somebody who's struggling to read and write as an adult. And we may think we're doing them a favor by pretending not to notice that, but in reality, the thing that may help change their life is having a really kind, gentle conversation with them and being willing to be their advocate. So we've had students come to us where their friend has actually called us first and said, hey, my friend is really struggling with reading and writing. How can I help them get help? So that's really, I think, one of the most important ways is to reach out to somebody, not to let somebody that you care about really suffer and feel this stigma and shame, but to say, hey, let's do this together. We've actually had friends and family members come through our tutoring program in adult literacy and then be the person who tutored their friend or family member. And so that's really, that's like next level help. But often just making that phone call or offering to come to our office and meet our staff for the first time is really just the bump that that person needs. And amazingly, we've never had an adult get mad at the person who brought them. They're never, why would you say that about me? They're actually like, wow, there's somebody that can help me, really? Thanks. And so we are not doing people favors by pretending not to notice how much they're struggling in this area.
So we got a few minutes left, but I wanted to make sure I asked each of you the programs that you're involved in, the organizations that you're involved in. What else do people need to know about how you're helping and how they can get help from you?
For us at P20, we really look at the student's path through the educational pipeline, and every time there's a transition, it's tough for students. And so those transitions between preschool and kindergarten, between elementary and middle and high and college and the workforce are the moments at which we can often lose students. And so to the extent possible, we've got to be really conscious about those transition points because that's where the pipe gets leaky. And so that's kind of a lot of the work we do, and literacy can be kind of insulating from all the ups and downs of those transitions, some of which aren't academic. So that's a lot of the work that we do.
How about you, Suzanne? We talked about a lot of the fun stuff, but what else do people need to know about how they should be thinking about the library and how they can connect?
I think just that we have the people, place, and collections, and so we have the staff that are waiting to help you. We have 51 locations on 6 islands. We have a library open every day of the week, and that we have over 3 million things that we can check out to you for free. And come summertime, we're going to have a summer reading program to try and slow down that summer slide to make sure the kids are continuing to read. We want it to be a whole family event, and we have some great sponsors. So we have Alaska Airlines. So yeah, so there's going to be some tickets to travel. If
Okay, people like that. So what else? What else do people need to know, Suzanne, about what you do and how you help?
I mean, we're very much direct services. So we have youth programs, we have adult programs, and so they can just go to our website or give us a call, and we can tell them all about whatever kind of services they need on that level. For the general public, maybe people who aren't looking for reading help, I think what all of us, I think, really need is additional awareness. Literacy continues to be a sort of hidden problem, and I feel as a state, if we're going to solve some of our other big problems, poverty, homelessness, workforce development, we are going to need to address literacy as a community. And so bringing folks together and not just relying on the teachers to solve this issue, making sure that parents have the support that they need to help their children learn to read. And really, if you look at the statistics, we have 1 out of 6 who can't read, which means we have 5 out of 6 who can. And so if we have some of those 5 out of 6, if every one of them thinks about their responsibility to make sure that the children in their life do get that education, do learn to read, are being read to, whether it's your child or not, I think we could make huge strides on the literacy issue in maybe just a decade or so.
You know, and I think that some people probably think that they don't qualify for your types of services or other services that are out there, or it's not bad enough in some shape or form. What do you want to express to those
I would say that if you have a goal in your life that you're not able to reach because of reading and writing, you should give us a call, whether that's going back to school, whether you're feeling lack of confidence in reading to your own children, whether you are hesitant to go for a promotion because of the writing that might involve. Any of those situations, if you're feeling that, we have programs that can help you, and they're all free.
And Lynn, you've been out there with your cohort of friends helping you.
So I think that this really is all about partnerships. I mean, I think we've heard that throughout the evening, and where you can volunteer to help. If any of the programs that you've heard about, that you can volunteer some time. We have volunteers for our prison project that I was talking to you about.
Okay.
They're all former educators, and they don't get paid. They're volunteers.
That's wonderful.
And it's like a 12-week course for 2 hours.
Lots of
the whole
different ways
time.
for people to get
and
involved in these
then
programs.
The last thing is that we have a conference.
Okay.
Because one of the things we feel is that when people can have professional development opportunities, which we provide at the conference, I think it helps to enhance.
And we know that a lot of this is online, so they can definitely look that up. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. Lynn Wahe'e, President of Read to Me International, Suzanne Schold, Executive Director of Hawaii Literacy Incorporated, Stacy Kaneshige, Director of the Hawaii State Library System, and Stephen Schatz, Executive Director of Hawaii P20. All right, next week on Insights, we focus on Ka'olelo Hawaii, the Hawaiian language, once forbidden and now thriving again. Join us. I'm Laura Yamada for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Ahui ho.